2 races down and Haas look like they've time travelled back to 2018. Kevin Magnussen has found himself as a consistent points finisher and a contender with those midfield cars, picking up 12 points in the first couple of races, which, considering where they were last year, is remarkable to me. And they're currently sitting in 5th place with more points than they've had over the past 2 seasons combined. So I want to talk about Haas and how they've been able to fix this position, going from stone dead last year to up there as possibly the best midfield team in Formula One. Let's talk about the downfall a little bit first and put some context in here, because 2019 saw the start of the end for Haas, effectively. It really did look like they were just on their way out of Formula One, especially with Rich Energy coming in, which I think is going to go down as probably the worst sponsorship that we've seen in Formula One in a very, very long time. But on top of that, the car itself had huge aerodynamic issues. It was completely destroying the tyres under race conditions, and they couldn't really find a fix over the course of the season either. It just got to the point where the team were in free fall, and there was no easy fix to the aerodynamics. There was no easy fix to the money that they needed behind the scenes as well. And 2020 basically just compiled that misery for Haas. Coming into 2020, obviously a worldwide pandemic hit, something that they couldn't have prepared themselves for and wouldn't probably have thought to prepare themselves for. But the team suddenly looked like its future of existence was in contention. Whether or not they were going to get back into the middle of the pack didn't really matter. It looked like the team was just going to disband and disappear from Formula One altogether. And at that point, Gunther Steiner had to make some really big decisions. He basically opted for those regulation changes in 2022 to be the ray of hope for Haas. And he just completely sacked off 2020 and 2021 from that point and just decided to go all out for those 2022 regulation changes. And everybody knows what happened to Haas last year. In 2021, they effectively took part, but they didn't really race. They brought in 2 new rookies to balance the books whilst preparing themselves for this new era in Formula One. It was a season to forget for lots of Haas fans and for the Haas team overall. And Gunther Steiner has even said how depressing it was just to be at the back of the grid and just to have to take part and have to be there every weekend, knowing that they weren't ever really going to get anything out of it. But the new regulations opened a huge door for Haas in 2 ways. First of all, the price cap for Haas themselves obviously gave them a huge boost. Being the smallest team in Formula One and the newest team to the grid, the fact that this price cap has come in and is going to help them to build around and build up to where the other teams have been. The Ferraris, the Mercedes, the McLarens, the Red Bulls have such wealth behind them, have effectively infinite money that they can throw at Formula One. A team like Haas having this budget cap and knowing that those teams can't outspend them massively anymore suddenly gives them a new lease of life, suddenly gives them a little bit of hope going into the future. But secondarily to that, they also gained massively from the fact that those bigger teams had to downsize slightly. Ferrari in particular had to downsize considerably in terms of the number of staff they had and the number of team members that they had because of this budget cap. And with the connections that Haas had with Ferrari, they were suddenly able to pick up loads and loads of these team members. We actually saw Haas and Alfa Romeo picking up team members from Ferrari because of that connection they have with the team. A new facility for Haas in Maranello, literally right next door, the Ferrari's facility, filled up with Ferrari personnel, all working for Haas and working towards that 2022 car. And it was best for Haas because they'd just been working on the Ferrari 2022 car, something that we know now has been sensational at the start of this season. And then suddenly Haas were able to pick up those team members and effectively just shuffle them over to the Haas 2022 car, taking the power unit with them, taking the suspension with them, taking some aerodynamic understanding with them over to the Haas team as well. Lots of transferable parts and skills and people between the Ferrari and Haas teams just push them up that little bit more. And it looked like we were going to see Haas as basically a junior Ferrari team or a sister Ferrari team coming into 2022. Obviously, they had, as I said, the power unit and all of the parts, but alongside that, they had Mick Schumacher, who is a Ferrari junior driver as well. So they properly look like a Ferrari sister team. And with the tunnel time restrictions as well, that meant that they had the most upgrade time, the most wind tunnel time, and could come into this season with all of the Ferrari package as well. So Haas were turning up and looking like it was going to be something special. Then they turn up to testing and it just went all Haas again. It suddenly just all fell apart. Even though they had all of this time to prepare, there were still massive question marks about this 2022 car and whether it was going to be ready for the first race of the season. Coming into Barcelona, they had huge technical issues. They missed loads and loads of running and it just looked like Haas again, where it was all going to fall apart towards the beginning of this season. Even coming towards Bahrain, they missed the flight to Bahrain, had some of their cargo not show up on time, and they had to resit some of the testing later on in the evenings when the teams had already finished theirs because they didn't have the cargo show up and they couldn't take part in the first testing session. It was so Haas. Like, if there was one car that it was just going to happen to, it was always going to be the Haas team that this kind of thing was going to happen to, wasn't it? And suddenly they didn't look like as good or as consistent as the red car that they had so hoped they would be closer to this season. And having to completely change their livery in Barcelona, having to completely change their driver lineup in Barcelona and Bahrain as well, just completely threw another spanner in the works. But if anything, it has been probably the step forward that they needed the most. Obviously, it's massive, and I obviously understand that Nikita Mazepin should have been in that Haas seat. Obviously, you know, his connections and the turmoil that is there, I completely understand why Haas decided to get rid of him, and I think they made the right decision doing so. But in getting Kevin Magnussen back as well, they have struck gold. It is absolutely phenomenal. The just idealization of Haas that has changed over the course of these first two races because of Kevin Magnussen. Now, it wasn't a guaranteed success. You've got to remember, Kevin Magnussen left the team in 2020 with a bitter taste in his mouth and a horrible feeling towards Formula One. Of all the drivers that were out there, I thought Kevin Magnussen was one of the least likely to take up that Haas seat. But he's come back into the team and he's scored more points than he did in that 2020 season with Romain Grosjean as his teammate, and now looks like he could take this team to another new level. Like, he's just been absolutely phenomenal. You can see his return has completely revitalized the team. It's given more structure to the team and the staff and himself, and he's just ready to go every single race. Obviously, there's no way that this is, you know, not a contentious issue, but as I said, coming in, getting a 5th place, probably should have been a 7th place, obviously, with the Red Bulls dropping out at the end, but you've got to take that 5th place when it's there, and he was still there to capitalise on that. And of course, the 9th place finish, back-to-back points, is something that Haas would have dreamed of a couple of years ago, and now it has come to a reality that they're getting there, they've revitalised, and they can preserve this. And Mick Schumacher is sort of the next step for them. If Mick Schumacher can step up to the plate and see Kevin Magnussen as that goal for him and stretch towards the levels of Kevin Magnussen and possibly get himself some points over the course of the season as well, suddenly we're looking at a team that has an experienced driver in Kevin Magnussen that is back at the wheel and showing his absolute best, and a young driver that is ready to carry the team forward over the next few years until he gets his seat at Ferrari. Like, suddenly we're looking at one of the best dynamics of the grid if Mick Schumacher can properly step up. I think the only question now for Haas is whether or not they can keep up with that midfield pack. It's going to be big. It's going to be a long season. There's 21 races left to go, and Haas maintaining their position that they currently have as the smallest team on the grid is going to be difficult. You know, as upgrades come, as the Alpines around them, the McLarens, the Alfa Romeos bring upgrades, and they start to, you know, use that cash that they've got, use that knowledge that they've got, use the foundation that they've got in Formula One to their advantage. Can Haas continue to keep up and keep upgrading at the same rate as the teams around them? You know, can they continue to improve at the same rate as some of those other cars? We've seen the Alpine at Saudi Arabia already absolutely phenomenally quick, and two drivers in there in Alonso and Ocon that are both gonna be consistent points finishers in my opinion. That's why I think Mick Schumacher needs to step up sooner rather than later. But the real positives obviously coming to Haas. With those upgrades coming, they've also got the most wind tunnel time left of everybody on the grid, so they can use that wind tunnel time for those upgrades, which is a really great thing for them to have. And as I said, they still have those connections with Ferrari. They still have the people that have come in because of the cost cap from Ferrari that could really take this team a step forward and have been thinking about those upgrades for the Ferrari car, and now can start to think about those upgrades for the Haas car as well. The drivers will improve. I think Kevin Magnussen will get better. I think Mick Schumacher will get better. It's just whether or not they can keep going with those upgrades. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Where do you see Haas finishing in that midfield pack? I think we're pretty much guaranteed now that they're going to finish above the likes of Williams and Aston Martin. I think it's the rest in there, 8th through 4th, is kind of tricky to see where Haas might end up over the course of the season. As I said, super early to call it, but I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Whilst you're there, leave a like, subscribe if you are new to the channel, and I will see you next time.